as it is with all complex topics, indeed we are seeing more and more questions than clarifications. So I really hope that we do have the time afterwards to take a few, because I think there are some distinctions which all of you could help us with. And I hope Paola is also ready, because we are.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making it to the last session, but not the least one, because we're going to speak about data privacy, and especially decentralizing privacy, data protection opportunities and challenges in the next generation internet. So I'm Paola Heudebert. I'm the head of legal and public affairs of Archipels, which is a French blockchain consortium working on decentralized identity management. And I'm also chair of the privacy working group of INATBA, which is International Association of Trusted Blockchain Application. So privacy is something which is very important to me. I'm a privacy lawyer initially. And today we are going to start by breaking down some data misconceptions that are going to be useful for the rest of the presentation. Then we are going to see what we learned from Web 2 and why we need to break data monopolies before diving a bit more into data protection opportunities and challenges in the Web3 space. So let's get started. The first thing I wanted to touch on is that what privacy means to me and what it means to you can be very different. But what we are going to talk about today is a branch of privacy, which is called information privacy. And it is important to remember that this is actually a fundamental right, that every one of us here today have a fundamental right to the protection of their personal data. So next time someone is telling you that they don't care about their personal data, you know, that's always a nice thing to remind. The other misconception that I think is important to remember is that we've been talking a lot about data today, but all data are not personal data. So when I will be referring to data today in this presentation, I will be mostly talking about personal data, which, as you may know, is a data that is related to an individual, a natural person, as you and me, that can be identified either directly or indirectly. So my name is Paola, this is a personal data, but my IP address or my public key on a blockchain will also be personal data, triggering the application of data protection regulations. The last but not least of the misconception I really want to touch on, and Shermin briefly talked about it, is the opposition between privacy and transparency. And, you know, it started a long time ago with an author called David Brins. And David Brins, in his book, Transparent Society, said that in the age of the advance of technologies, not only privacy was not necessary, but was not even feasible or desirable. So I tend to disagree because nowadays we have additional layers of encryption or obfuscation that can be built on top of decentralized ledger that allows you to reconcile privacy and transparency. So I'm going to cite only one example for the sake of time here, but ZKP, which stands for Zero Knowledge Proof, is actually a technique that allows you cryptographically to demonstrate that an assertion is true without having to revealing the information behind this assertion. So I'm going to take an example to make it more concrete for the audience. Let's say that we have this person named Jan, and Jan wants to buy alcohol online. As you may know, we need to be over 18 years old in the EU area to buy alcohol. So what Jan is going to do normally in the Web2 space is that she will provide a full date of birth to the service provider, to the alcohol vendor. But with ZKP, Jan will be able to only send a proof that she's over 18 without having to disclose this information. So transparency and privacy can work together with these additional layers of cryptography and obfuscation that we built on top of the decentralized ledger. So now I think both Shermin and Fernando touched on that, and it was very, very interesting that Web 2 was a Web 2 of platforms. And now we are evolving towards the Web3 space, and we need to understand that it's important to break these data monopolies. Personally, I love the way Gavin Wood, who's the co-founder, of Ethereum, but also of Polkadot, talk about the opposition between Web 2 and Web 3. So he's referring to the pre-Snowden and the post-Snowden world. And what we realize after this big platform, this Facebook, this GAFAM, being in the middle, is that we people, we human of the internet, were kind of guinea pigs for this model that make as much money as they can of personal data. So let me give you a quick illustration about this guinea pig thing. So here on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the Facebook invoice. That's something that Olivier Aubert, which is a researcher at the UB, a university in Belgium, made back in 2018. So the goal of Olivier Aubert was to say to Facebook, here, I've been using this network for the last 7 years. This is how much money you actually owe me for the use of my personal data. So this is a crunchy example. This is the end of the presentation, but the idea behind this Facebook invoice is to show that we have two major problems from Web 2, which is the lack of data subject, user control over our personal data, but also the fact that we are not getting incentivized, that we don't get sufficient benefits from the use that are made from our personal data. And the good news is that we are going to see how Web3 can actually address both of these problems. So the first thing, which is very interesting, is called self-sovereign identity. So Shermin and Fernando have been briefly mentioning this concept. So to understand self-sovereign identity, it's very important to understand that Web 1, the first layer of the internet, it was built without an identity layer, without a way to handle your digital identity. Then in the Web 2 model, big platform, they try to find some solutions to give you an online identity. So in the centralized model that you can see on the left-hand side here on the little figure, what you will do is that you will create an account, a digital identity per service provider. So I will have a Facebook account, I will have an Amazon account, I will have a Uber account, even a WebEx account to connect to the seminar today. This is the centralized model of handling personal data and digital identity. On the other right-hand side, you have the federated model of handling digital identity. So in the middle, you have a middleman, and you know that because you see it every day. This is Facebook Connect, Google Connect, Meta Connect, you name it. So here, you're connecting with your Google address, or you're connecting with your whatever person in the middle address to provide identity to services. So the big surprise is that both of these models are not privacy preserving and are, coming from the Web 2 space. So what is self-sovereign identity? Self-sovereign identity is a new way of thinking about digital identity, which is really rooted in the principle that individuals should be in control of their digital identity and of all the associated data. So we don't have time here because I think it's very important for the audience to ask questions to really dig into the specifics. But what you need to understand is that it's a peer-to-peer relationship between three parties. You, as an individual, you will be in the middle, having the digital wallet that was talking about, and you will be storing credentials in this wallet that you will choose to disclose to different parties with consent, granularity, and really knowing what is happening to your personal data. The very good news is that the EU Commission, in its recent proposal to create a European digital identity framework, embraced the self-sovereign identity model. So the piece is currently being debated and will be voted soon. So hopefully we'll have SSI full implementation in Europe very soon. So that's it for the first, new model of personal data processing I wanted to present. The second one, but not the least, is something called data Daos. So both Serin and Fernando have been talking about DAOs, which stand for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, So just as a reminder, a Daos is an online community which is organized through one or even more smart contracts, so computational rule on top of the blockchain. And a data DAO is something very interesting and very recent. It's a community composed of individuals, entities, which project is actually to create a common data pool. A data pool which is supporting individual data rights, but which is more interestingly rewarding data owner for their data use. So but most of the projects I've been studying so far involve two prongs. The first prong being the massive use of privacy-enhancing technologies, which is a good news, encryption, differential privacy, secure computing, and of course the DLT as the infrastructure. And very interestingly, they are based on something called data NFTs. So every NFT is a data NFTs, but so it's a data-backed token that will represent your personal data. And what is very interesting is that in the token itself, you can define the data policy. So you can say, I'm the data owner. I want this data set to be used in this setting, but not in this setting, which means that data receivers will be able to run computation on the data, on your personal data, backed by the token, but only respecting these policies. And then you will be rewarded on data use. So it's very innovative. And to make it a bit more concrete, let's see an example, which is also very crunchy. So the first data NFTs, one of the first data NFT of personal data, I mean, was actually minted on a protocol named Oasis, with the Oasis tech, sorry. And it was a sequenced genome of Professor George Church, which is a professor of genomics. And that's very interesting to see that, for instance, in this context, Professor George Church will be able to get to monetize his genome for research purposes, for instance, giving access to his genetic data through this NFT, being protected with privacy-enhancing technologies. But that's actually very interesting. Okay, we saw the opportunities, but I'm a lawyer, so I always saw challenge as well. So let's dig into the privacy challenges of Web3. So the first challenge, which is important to note, is that the regulation that we've been talking about, with Gemma's talk, for instance, they are all great, but some aspect of this regulation don't really work with decentralized system. And that's very important and crucial that regulators being able to keep pace with the speed of this industry. So let me give you a few examples. So most data protection regulation, including the EU data protection regulation, GDPR, plan that individuals have a right to be forgotten, a right to erasure on their personal data. So this, for instance, clash with the immutable characteristic of blockchain. We of course have technical solution to do so, to ensure in effect deletion of the data, but we don't know if legally it will stand for compliance with GDPR. Another issue that we can see from a data privacy perspective, for instance, is that GDPR was written for centralized system, and when we want to do international data transfer, you might have your data being stored in many different places, many different nodes across the world. So how do you do that? And this actually allows me to, open up a bit the question, which is, from an international law perspective, which country has jurisdiction over DLT? And only a few days ago, the American SEC, Security and Exchange Commission, released a court filing, and you can read the last line with me, which is, it's on the Ethereum network, and they just said that because most of the Ethereum validator, the person making the network work, if you want, were based in the US, then the US had jurisdiction over the Ethereum network. So this is a bit of a bomb in the industry because that's the first ruling of this kind. This is only a court filing. Let's see where it goes. But it shows that we have a huge problem with regulation being made for centralized system when it comes to decentralized system. The next challenge, which I want to touch on, is the ownership of personal data. So in every presentation, we've been talking about data ownership. The thing is, when it comes to personal data, there is no concept of property in data protection law. I mean, Brazil has a concept of ownership, so cheer up to Brazilian around here, but it's the only jurisdiction I know of having this concept of data ownership. But GDPR, for instance, give you rights on your data. So you have a right of access, you have a right to eraser, you have a right to rectification, but you don't have individual right, property rights, sorry, more than that. So when we are thinking about this system, it's very important to keep that in mind and to draw the consequences. However, what can be interesting is that we could have ownership over NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and maybe data NFTs. So, I mean, this is not sure, and this is a very fast-moving environment, but the thing is, you have two prongs on that. Once we'll say that blockchain title doesn't mean blockchain title. It's not because I have a transaction saying that I am now owning this NFT that I am the owner. And this is actually what OpenSea's terms and conditions that you can see here is saying. So OpenSea is one of the biggest NFT trading platform. And if you read the last line with me, they say that they do not guarantee the transfer of the title of the NFT. So even the biggest NFT trading platform in the world say that they don't guarantee that you are the legal owner of the NFT. But at the same time, we have some courts around the world that start recognizing ownership of NFTs. And this is especially the case of the UK in a recent case like 3 months ago that said that NFT is legal property. So we might, this is very prospective here, but find ways to have data ownership by NFT, owning like the representation of the data. So this is the last challenging and challenges, and then I promise we can move to question time. But this is a very important one. So we've been talking about data Daos and the way we could actually use data Daos to reward the use of that is made of our personal data. The thing is, how do you put a price tag on personal data? That's a very, very complex question. What is your data valued? Is that the proportion of the company annual revenue? Is that the remuneration of the value the consumer data has for the business, like we've seen with the Facebook invoice? That's a very big question and very philosophical one as well. Also, the other issue is that what is worth is not necessarily a piece of data, but what is worth is the aggregation of data. Let me explain. So Cambridge Analytica, I mean, everybody heard about that, I think, was a big case. And what happened is that they used two data sets. The first data set was Americans that bought an American car, a Chrysler, in the last year before Trump election. The second data set was people who didn't vote in the last election. And by combining these two data sets, they were able to target swinger voter, people that didn't vote in the last election, and just to make sure, you know, that they target the right people. So the real value was in the aggregation of data. And the last thing I'm going to say is that data economics and data monetization is a very big topic, and the risk of it is to create a two-tier world where you have one class of the population, the least privileged, that are incentives to sell their data, their personal data, and one other part which are not because they can't afford privacy. And this is what is going on today with so-called cookie paywalls, where you can refuse to have your cookie being, you can refuse cookies, sorry, if you pay for it. So do we want privacy to be a luxury? I'm not sure about it. And I think we know we've been talking about values, been reflecting on values. We have questions in the chat about values, but I think it's very important and it's our collective responsibility to encode information privacy as a default setting to make sure that the technical realm reflects it to build the next generation internet. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much. And yeah, question time, I think. Thank you.